start up again.
I noticed that,
And maybe we'll start. I'll say something. I'll say a few more comments or thoughts about boundaries, and then we can do a little interactive exercise with that. I don't know, and then we'll see how time is. We'll decide what else to cover. First thing I want to say is I'll make a few comments though. One is, I haven't thought about this. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they don't usually use the word boundary unless there's one context in which actually the word boundary is used traditionally, and that's a retreat. They'll talk about establishing the boundary of your retreat, which is a great point in a way, because what they say actually is, what's the purpose of the boundary of a retreat? And if you start, if somebody's doing a meditation retreat, then they establish boundaries, right? And the purpose of those boundaries is the purpose of, for a Buddhist practitioner, of all boundaries, which is, so you say, okay, I'm doing a retreat, and I'm going to establish, there's actually a Tibetan ritual sometimes, if you're doing a certain kind of retreat, where you'll take some stones, and you'll put or something like that, a symbol, and you'll actually put them in certain places, and you'll say, I'm not going to go beyond this point. And you actually do a ritual in front of the stone, at the beginning of your retreats, where you're sort of imagining a protective boundary around you. And the meaning of that is actually to stop your own mental afflictions. It's your mental afflictions, your anger, your jealousy, your craving, your addiction, your all those things, right? So there is, and because the whole, I remember I once had this whole thing with my teacher, one of my teachers, Gyume Khyentse Rinpoche. I was saying I was going to do a retreat, and then he said, it was funny, first I wasn't admitting it, but in the back of my mind I had some idea, oh wow, I could have some vision, good dreams, or some kind of transformation or something. And then he said, I didn't tell him that, but he said, if you were to do a retreat and you had some kind of visions or good dreams or insights or something, he said, that doesn't mean anything at all. It's totally useless. Then he said, no meaning, and he said, the only benefit, the meaning of a successful retreat is you have fewer negative states of mind, like mental afflictions, like jealousy and pride and ignorance, and you have more love and compassion and patience and wisdom. So that's the sign of a good retreat. Anything else is not the sign of a good retreat. It's irrelevant. And I was like, oh, that's great. And then he said, and then he was pointing out, and then you establish a boundary. And he said, actually, whether you draw a rock or you put a line or you don't put a line, doesn't matter. What matters is you have to figure out for yourself, how is this retreat? What are the boundaries of my retreat? What are the things that would make me have more mental afflictions, and I'm not going to do them, or else it's not a retreat. Right? And if something doesn't cause you mental afflictions, then you're fine to do that. If it does cause some mental afflictions, then of course it's not a retreat if you're doing it. So establish some boundaries for yourself like that. That's the meaning of the boundaries. And I was like, that's beautiful. But I thought, well, that's the meaning of all boundaries, actually, isn't it? Whereas is that you establish boundaries so you won't have mental afflictions. And so I wanted to say, so there's one kind of boundary that's with yourself, right? I'll give an example. Just the other day I was talking to somebody who was saying that when they watch the news, they become angry. So they thought, it's better to watch less news. It's the only logical thing to do. What's the use of watching the news and feeling irritated and angry? What a great strategy. I was like, what a great strategy. Just stop watching. Take a break. Take a media break, right, for a period of time, and then then go back and see if it still causes it, and do it a little. And I did that with my partner, Shayla. She was like, so we said, let's take a break for I forget what it was. A while, a month and a half or something. So let's just not watch any news. So we stopped watching the news. And then when that period was over, one day I turned on the news, and then she was watching. She said, "What?" And I said, "Oh, let's turn it back off." Let's turn it back on. But the point being, if whatever is causing you mental afflictions, do less of it. Does that make sense? Or don't do it. That's one. So one version of boundaries with yourself, right? So you recognize, oh, this certain kind of, I'm hanging out with this group. Well, I don't have to go to that group. It's causing mental afflictions. Or I'm watching this, or I'm reading this kind of book, and it's making me. I had that experience one time. I started reading a book, and it was just making me more and more agitated. I was like, well, why in the world would I continue reading this book? And I give back to the library, because that would be, that's boundary with yourself. Then the second kind of boundary is with other people, right? And that's usually, well, they both could be hard, but that's usually a little harder sometimes. And I just want to make a few comments. One is, Which one point is like, so Tibetan lamas don't use like, if you think about the meaning of retreat, one, then it applies in any context. Second one is, although Tibetan lamas don't is to say that, I've noticed over the years from spending a lot of time with some Tibetan lamas, that they're excellent at this. Like, I can give you many examples, like in Tibetan monks also. Like, I remember one time I was sitting with, I've had the same experience. Once I was sitting with Lama Zopa at like a lunch table, and somebody who started talking about something that was not meaningful, and Lama Zopa just left. Like in the middle, the person was still talking. He just walked upstairs. He said, "I'm going to go meditate," as he was walking out. And I had the same experience with Gyumei Khyentse Rinpoche. One time, my friend and I had requested that he give some teaching to us because he was staying at my house and he was giving us like a personal teaching after work. So we got there and after work, and he gave us the teaching. And then we were asking some questions about the teaching, and he was answering our questions very kindly. And then we kind of finished our questions, and we started chatting about work. And like I was looking at my friend, and we're talking about work, and suddenly I felt something brush against my arm, and I thought, what? And it was Rinpoche's robe. And he was like, he just walked out. He was like, he went up the stairs, he was meditating again. I knew, and I was like, it was like, I don't need to hear you talk about that. You know, I was here to teach, and when teaching's done, I'm done. You know, I was like, wow, that was very clear, no ambiguity. I had the same experience, not the same, I had a different experience that was similar with a geshe, a friend of mine, Geshe Tashi, where I had gotten, there was this guy who had been sending me, I was just sharing a story, there was this guy who had been sending me emails, and he was like angry, he was saying these all these angry things about the Dalai Lama, and Lama Zopa, and all these different, and I was like, I had this idea I would try to be helpful, so I'm writing back, trying to say like, oh, maybe if you thought of it this way, or maybe you didn't notice it, and of course, each time I say something, then he's saying things insulting me, and insulting them again. And then I'm sitting next to Geshe Tashi on the couch one day, and I'm sitting next to him, and I hear bloop, you know, like that sound when an email comes in. So I glance over, and I saw he had just gotten an email from this guy. And as soon as I'm like, look at him, and he immediately, you know, like you don't have to open an email, but you can click on the little thing on the left and then delete it. So he clicks on the thing and deletes it without reading it. And I could see it was a personal email. It was obvious, you know. And I said, oh, that was from so and so. And he said, yeah. And he said, oh, yeah. And I said, how come you didn't read it? And you just deleted it. And he said, well, someone could get angry if I read that. Why would I want to, so why would I read it? What do you mean? And I was like, oh, he's a lot wiser and has a lot better boundaries than me. And I was like, from that point forward, I just copied his example. Like, whereas what was the point of, I was wasting my time and becoming agitated. He was much wiser than me and set boundaries. So then, okay, so then, and then I wanted to say also, so I wanted to make one more point. This not from Buddhism, but that I couldn't find this in this book, but it was a story that helped me understand something about boundaries, and it's a story of it's actually a story really about Martin Luther King Jr.'s father that I found very touching. And the story is, so one day, so Martin Luther King Jr., I guess this would be Martin Luther King Sr., right? He was in the car with his young son, right? So Martin Luther King Jr. is a child, sitting in the car with his dad. And his dad is driving in the state they're from, which I think was Alabama, someplace in the south. Can't remember which state now. But, and the father gets pulled over by a police officer. And it's funny, I often say you have to remember the year, right? This is like before the Civil Rights Movement, although I'm not sure it matters. But anyway, in the sense that I'm not sure things are that different, but sometimes. But they were different now than then, for sure. And anyway, so this police officer pulls Martin Luther King Sr. over, and there's a young white police officer with a gun comes up to the car and starts saying, boy, you were doing this, and boy, and he's talking in a demeaning way to this elder preacher, minister. And I always imagine this moment, right? So here's Martin Luther King Sr., right? Who's an elder minister in his church, who's being insulted and put down and called boy by a man with a gun, right? And then he looks at his son, right? And he knows his son is paying attention. And his son's the one who later tells the story, of course. And at a certain point, he turns to the white police officer and he says, sir, I'm not going to get the exact wording, but pretty much like this. He says, sir, I accept your authority to give me a ticket, but if you continue to speak to me in that way, I am not going to speak to you and I'm going to drive away. And I think, wow. In that moment, he knew perfectly well he might get shot in the head. But he said that anyway. Um, and my impression from the story was that the white young male police officer got so flustered to be spoken back to at all by a black man in that context that he just handed him the ticket, didn't say another word, just handed him the ticket and walked away. And obviously, it was not a shooting. But I thought, there are a couple points in that moment of that story that I just wanted to reflect on together. I mean, one is, wow, the effect. One is what bravery. That's the first, right? Like, what incredible bravery on behalf of dignity, on behalf of self-respect, and also on the behalf of his son. Right? I thought, wow, the story was told later by the son, right? Because obviously it impacted him. In terms of being willing to stand up for dignity, even when it's dangerous. And the reason why I say that is that usually I find that for people, and the reason why one is I thought that story was quite beautiful and touching, and also the element of bravery and dignity in it are important. And then part of the reason I sometimes think about that is that for us, right, that we may sometimes have to set boundaries. And for us also, it takes courage, right? Because people won't always like when you set a boundary. Just like that police officer didn't necessarily, I don't think he liked it either. But, so it takes courage. But sometimes I think of that story and I'm like, well, does it take as much courage as he had? You know, there is, probably not. So if he could do that for that, then maybe I can do it for whatever I need to say, is one point. So I sometimes think of that example to say, if he could do that, then I could probably do this little thing, is one point. And then another point is, you know, he also said, sir, right? I think that's important. Like he didn't treat.
He was respectful.
He was respectful, also. And that's also boundaries. Does that make sense? A boundary is not aggressive. A boundary is clear and unambiguous, but it's not aggressive. Yeah. And so that's how you set a boundary, right? It's a perfect example. And my point is this, is boundaries reflect respect for the other and respect for oneself. Does that make sense? It reflects a sense of respect for both. That's when it's an interpersonal boundary. If it's a personal boundary, then it just has to be respect for yourself. Of course, if it's like, I'm not going to watch this sort of thing, or I'm not going to read this book, then it's just, you have to be respecting yourself. If it's interpersonal, that reflects respect for both parties. And it's a beautiful practice then, isn't it? And a couple more points, right? I said this a little bit earlier, I'll just say it very briefly. Another is that, so setting boundaries also, how do you say it right? If you're going to do it in the context of your Dharma practice, right, then it requires also that you really be honest with yourself, right? And that you say, that you check in. All right, what am I capable of now? You know, and where I can still be loving in my heart. And if it's something beyond what I'm capable of, and still be loving in my heart, then I have the responsibility, like the retreat, right, where you put the stone. Like, then I have a responsibility to say no. And then to check in again, and keep checking, you know, at each phase of my life, or each period, and how much can I do? And then sometimes you make mistakes, you know, like you do too much, or you do too little, and then you have to kind of go, oh, I could do more, or oh, I need to do less. You know, and if you don't, I just had that experience from last year. Like, late last year, I noticed this. Like, I had set up to do a whole bunch of things that were wonderful, joyful, meaningful things. Like, I was so happy to do them. And there came a point where I did too many in a row, and there came a point where even though each one was wonderful and joyful and meaningful, it was like attending Dharma teachings and teaching, traveling to teach, and doing other things like that. I mean, they're all wonderful. But then I realized that there came a certain point where it was so many that I wasn't feeling, like that I was feeling more stressed and tired than I was loving. And I was like, oh wow, I love doing those things, but I made a commitment. I was like, next year, I'm gonna schedule it so that it's on this side of that boundary. I went just a little too far on the other side, didn't. And so I need to get a response. And then I was like, oh, I really want to go to this other thing. And I'm like, no, you can't do that because you know from experience, in 2 years, try again, you know.
Yeah, go to the center, balance.
Yeah, this time I could do it. It's okay.
Sometimes we do too much.
Yeah, but I spread it out. It was different time of year. So what I wanted to suggest actually is that maybe we could do an exercise again.
Yep.
And what I want to suggest is again, in small groups, do it small, you know, but is to think for yourself, like I just gave an example for me, right? I need to do that for this year. And that was an interpersonal where some, like, actually just now, so somebody says, oh, can you come to, and I've said, well, maybe in 2020, or maybe in this, whatever, like, and it's figuring it out honestly. And it's hard because I would like to do it, but, so what I want to suggest is for yourself to do that same, and it could be with a person, like, great if it's with a person, so if there's a person where you need to set a boundary, or if it's with yourself that you need to set a boundary. But to pick one example that's real, in other words, where you say, okay, I have to admit to myself, this is the truth, that if I do the thing I'm in the direction of doing right now without setting a boundary, at some point I'm going to be angry or resentful or stressed out and unhappy, or something like that, right? Somewhere that you pick, maybe exhausted and depressed, whatever it would be for you, right? And then to actually skillful, because boundaries require skill, actually to say, okay, so what would the boundary be, right? That would actually keep me on this side of that line, right? And then, if it's with yourself, how am I going to do it and for how long, and how am I going to be honest with myself and clear with myself? And if it's with somebody else, how am I going to go and say it to them in a clear way that's respectful and not demeaning to them, but honest and clear? Does that make sense? And that's a real practice, isn't it? So why don't we do this? This one will take maybe 10, 15 minutes, something like that. So go ahead, bring them to groups, come up with one example, and just share it with somebody, and really make a commitment. Actually, try to make a commitment in that conversation. Okay, I'm going to give this a real try. I'm going to go set this one boundary, just one, with myself or somebody else about any issue you want. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay, go ahead.
I don't know, they say that